One of the things that I think is important, and I just was reading the handout, and I think it's important when we talk about that, you know, in over 230 years, we've added 37 states into slavery and segregation, fought wars, expanded voting rights, and our population has gone from about 2.5 million to over 327 million, and yet over 700,000 Americans who work and pay taxes have no representation in Congress. That makes no sense. Not at all. This is something that is long overdue. It's something that we must stand up and begin to address. But it's just like, you know, I was talking with some people today and the news I was interviewed. It's just like we talk about, and I have to bring this up because it's important to me, but we talk about the drug bust. I think a lot of you seen that today, you know, yesterday on the news. You know, one of the things we talk about, this is an age-old problem. And until we stand up and speak out, until we stand up and represent those who are not being represented, we're going to have these issues. You know, these are problems that are in our community. Just like we look at the mass shootings, these are problems, but we have to go to the root of the cause. And if we don't go to the root of it, then we're going to be here next year and the year after having our senator come here and ask us, you know, for help. You know, and I'm tired. You know, I want this to happen. I want it to be over. You know, I want to come visit. You know, I want to come visit and celebrate. I don't want you to have to come to Iowa and have to, you know, say, hey, I need help to get this done. But we have to stand up in each and every one of us. So whatever plan we leave here tonight, Tamyra, we should leave with a plan of action on what we need to do. Talking is over, folks. We got to quit talking. We got to quit marching. I mean, marching is fine as long as we got action with it. But it's time now. Let's get our plan of action. I support Senator, whatever the plan is, you know, and if we gotta, you know, get up and show up on a plane or a bus, I'm not driving, so, you know, but if we can show up out there, let's do that. But we gotta do.
Some of you here tonight might be here because you share a passion for statehood. Some of you are here because you didn't know people in D.C., don't share the same rights as everybody else, and you wanted to learn more about it. And some of you may be here because I called you on the phone and asked you to be here. But whatever your reason, you're here, and we really appreciate that. The reason that we can be here tonight, though, is because the Founding Fathers believed in representation. They believed every citizen should have a voice. It wasn't until the passage of the Organic Act in 1801 that people of Washington, D.C. had the right repealed and were put under the rule of Congress. In 1801, there were only 1,900 people living in Washington, D.C. That total number has grown to over 700,000 today. In November of 2016, with a record turnout, 86% of D.C. voters voted for statehood. They want statehood. There are many things in the Constitution that made sense or were accepted at the time, but were later changed because we grew, both physically and morally, as a nation. In the last 232 years, we've grown from 2.5 million, as you heard Akeo mention, in 13 states to over 327 million in 50 states, amended the Constitution many times. None of these changes happened overnight, nor were they easy to make. Change rarely is. But it's time for this to change. It's time we ended taxation without representation in our country, as our Founding Fathers intended over 200 years ago. It's time to restore the rights of the people of D.C. It's time for New Columbia to become a state. So here's what we can do in Iowa. The eyes of the nation are on us as the first in the nation caucus state. We need to be talking about statehood and the people of D.C. in every banquet hall, union hall, restaurant, coffee shop, and living room. Spread the word that this is about people, not party. It's about fundamental, constitutional American rights. When you talk to one of the many presidential candidates traveling our state, ask them, do you support D.C. statehood? It's up to us to make sure this issue stays in the conversation leading up to the next election and beyond until D.C. statehood becomes a reality. H.R. 51 is currently in the U.S. House with 201 co-sponsors, including Iowa Congressman Dave Loebsack.
Yay!
We need to call the other Iowa members of Congress and tell them to support H.R. 51, and you want them to do the same. That we support H.R. 51, and you want them to do the same. Sign our petition tonight. This is another thing you can do. On your table, there's a petition, and we're going to be circulating this both online and in person at events all across the state. Signing this petition to let our legislators know that we want them to support H.R. 51, and that we want our state legislature to pass a resolution in favor of D.C. statehood. With that, I would like to introduce you to our very special guest tonight. Paul Strauss has served the people of D.C. as a senator since 1996. He has his daughter with him this evening, Samantha. Samantha, where are you?
Woohoo!
Where is she? There's Samantha. She's here looking at colleges, and we hope she chooses Iowa as where she wants to be. That's right. We have some great institutions here like Grandview University.
Hey!
So this is not the senator's first trip to Iowa, and I'm certain it won't be the last, though he may be the only senator outside of Iowa to visit and not run for president. Please give a warm Iowa welcome to D.C. Senator Paul Strauss.
Thank you so much. It really is an honor and a privilege to be here, and especially knowing just how many events, political events, are going on in this state right now. To see all of the people who are here tonight really is very moving for me, and I know the people of Washington, D.C. Appreciate your interest and support very, very much. As Tamyra said, I am U.S. Senator Paul Strauss, a position elected by voters in the District of Columbia. In D.C., the election for United States Senator works just like any other election. You have to meet the constitutional requirements: 30 years of age, a U.S. citizen, residing in the district, every requirement that any other U.S. Senator has to meet. You have to be nominated by your party. You compete in a free and public election. And when you win, it's because the residents of Washington, D.C. came out and cast the majority of votes for you. And that's where things begin to change, because although D.C. voters are able to vote for me or the candidate of their choice, when I go to the Congress of the United States to try and represent them in the United States Senate, I cannot return the favor and cast a vote on their behalf. Neither can our non-voting delegate in the House, and that's the kind of injustice that's just wrong. It flies to the definition of exactly what we think it means to be an American, and yet it is the reality for residents of the District of Columbia. Residents of D.C. are American citizens. They meet all of the burdens and responsibilities of American citizenship. They pay full federal taxes, just like the citizens of every other state. In fact, we pay more taxes per capita than a majority of many of the states. We contribute almost $4 billion into the Treasury of the United States. We have a population which exceeds several states in the United States, particularly Vermont and Wyoming, but we're pretty close to Alaska, Delaware, and many of the other states with smaller populations. We serve this country in uniform and in civilian government and in many roles We have fought in every war that this country has had, but we are denied the basic principles and liberties that you, as a U.S. citizen, take for granted. Earlier today, I had the privilege of visiting your state capital, and I have to tell you, I consider it, I've been in more than a few of those around the country, and you have one of the most beautiful buildings in the world. But the part that always gets me and that caught my attention is that wall of patriots. As I was walking by on my way to see your state constitution. We have a wall like that in D.C. It has probably a few more people of color on it, but the color of those uniforms of those service people was all the same. D.C. residents, just like Americans around this country, have fought for and died in service to their country, but when they come back, the coffin, the flag that drapes that coffin doesn't have a star on it for the place that sent them. And that's not just about mere symbolism. It's about the denial of the equality and the principles that stand in there. It's painful to know that right now men and women in uniform are representing the District of Columbia, but I, as their senator, don't have a vote on whether to declare that war or even to make sure that they're funded with enough body armor or the type of things that keep them safe. The injustice has to end. DC residents aren't the people who are without civic engagement. We're not the people that care about this government the least. But one of the unfair attacks on my community is that somehow we're not a real place with real Americans, that we are a branch of the federal government, that we are some kind of theme park of monuments without any real people living there. Well, over 700,000 citizens live there, the majority of which have nothing to do with the federal government. When we started this campaign here in Iowa a few years ago, and I look back at some of the old things, and we even saw a slide up here, and it said almost 700,000 residents. Well, we've gone over that. Our population continues to grow. The average person that moved to the District of Columbia recently works in technology. They have very little to do with government, and it's a dynamic economy that contributes, and we're not dependent on the federal government. In fact, in some ways, we're supporting the federal government. I got to tell you, when President Trump shut down the government not long ago, D.C. residents stepped up to pick up the trash, clean the streets, take care of things that would normally be in federal parks, the responsibility of those employees. We serve this community, and we're denied the same rights, and that's wrong. Iowa residents have a special place in our political culture. It's no accident that we're here tonight in Des Moines to talk about our cause to really Americans' most influential voters. We need you to do what we can't. We need you to talk to these candidates as they come here, as they campaign. We need you to take the spirit of civic engagement and give us a chance to make our voices heard. It seems ironic, I know. Throughout most of our country's history, the way it's worked in theory, and in many cases in practice, is that citizens come to Washington, D.C. to petition their own government for a redress of their grievances. Well, for those of us who live in your nation's capital, that's not working out too well for us. So we've actually come here to the heart of America to petition you, our fellow citizens, for a redress of our grievances. There are absolutely no valid and justified reasons why this shouldn't happen. I've heard some partisan ones, but I haven't heard any principled ones. let me make this clear. This is not an attempt by one party to use some kind of gimmick to gain an extra seat here or there. This has nothing to do with democratic advantage. This is about fundamental fairness. Right now, the United States Senate disproportionately doesn't represent all of its citizens equally. We know that in a government founded on the principle of one person, one vote, that we had a compromise. But right now, over 70% of the senators belong to 30% of the people in the United States. And that's not right. D.C. statehood is a way to create a little bit more fairness and a little bit more representation, not just for the individual residents of Washington, but for a community of people whose voices aren't always heard. And so it means a lot to me and my fellow citizens that you've come here to learn more about it, or if you know about it, to recommit towards helping us with this struggle. We want to engage with you. We need your help. We've had a great victory in the House of Representatives recently. We passed a bill called H.R. 1, which sets forth the principles that include D.C. statehood as a way of ending one of the most egregious forms of voter suppression. We talk a lot about ending voter suppression. We complain about oddly drawn congressional districts where not everybody gets an equal chance to vote. Well, we're talking about an oddly worded congressional district where nobody gets an equal chance to vote. And we were proud that among the supporters and voters of H.R. 1, among the co-sponsors, a bill which language expressly includes D.C. statehood, were Iowa's two new congressional representatives, Representative Axney, Representative Finkenauer. But we need them to take one more step. We need them to co-sponsor H.R. 51, our resolution. We know we have their support on record with H.R. 1, but one of the most important things we can do is get enough co-sponsors so that we can get this bill to the floor. And the magic number in the House is 218. And right now we are at 201. And we're counting on you to help us get two more from Iowa, and we'll work on the rest. Let me close by saying DC residents aren't asking for any kind of special privileges. We want the same rights that every other American enjoys and deserves. But we need you to help us get it. I want to thank you all for being out here. I want to make sure that I have time to engage with you and answer any questions. But I can tell you, when the folks back home in Washington see how many of you came out and see how engaged you are and how committed you are to fairness and democratic values, it's going to mean an awful lot to your fellow Americans from Washington. Thank you.